Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crimes and Curiosities panel. I'm Allie Gosselink, and I'll be moderating this session with four fantastic authors of twisted mysteries and dramatic suspense stories that really run the gamut of tone and character personality. So today we're welcoming CJ Box to talk about his game warden character, Joe Pickett's 26th adventure, The Crossroads, publishing in February 2026, and in which Joe's daughters must solve his attempted murder. Charles Finch, creator of Victorian-era detective Charles Lennox, whose 12th mystery, The Hidden City, begins with a cold case but heats up quickly, and this comes out on November 4th, 2025. We also have Jensen, author of many comics, along with the novel Godfall, in which a giant has fallen from the sky into rural Nebraska, and that re-releases in January of 26. And last but not least, we have Josi Kilpack, whose newest character, LuLu Dupree, navigates the effects of a brain injury while trying to avoid someone's best attempts to kill her. Who's After LuLu Dupree publishes in September of this year. One of our authors, Ross Montgomery, who's the author of The Murder at World's End, couldn't be with us today, but his book is a locked room mystery set in 1910 Cornwall, and it's been described as Knives Out meets Downton Abbey. We have a short video from him to show you guys in a little bit. But please join me in welcoming our panel of accomplished writers to the stage. We're going to go around and have everybody introduce themselves and their books and their character. And we're going to start with CJ. Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
Hi there. Good morning. Thank you. Thanks for letting me know that. Yeah, I'm CJ Box. I'm the author of 31 novels. The newest one to come out in February is called The Crossroads. It's the 25th Joe Pickett novel. And Joe Pickett is a Wyoming game warden. The story started in 2001. I never thought there would be a second Joe Pickett novel, but here we are 25 years later. In The Crossroads, it's a very different kind of Joe Pickett book in that in the very opening chapter, Joe Pickett's truck is found, reported with bullet holes in it. There's a body inside. Mary Beth, his wife, gets a call that every wife of a law enforcement officer dreads, and that is, your husband's been shot. And he's found. He's been shot in the head. He's immediately airlifted to Billings, Montana, from northern Wyoming, and is put into a coma in the hospital while they deal with the injury. And Joe Pickett's three adult daughters get together for the first time in any of the books to try to solve the crime, try to figure out who did it. And the story is primarily told from their point of view while Joe struggles to survive, actually. And that book's going to come out February 23rd. I'm quite excited about it because it is different and because it is written from the point of view of the daughters who've been growing in real time through the entire series and are now adults.
They are really fascinating characters. I'm looking forward to asking you about them in a minute. Charles, can you tell us about The Hidden City?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much, Allie, for moderating. And I just wanted to say I'm honored to be here because I was a certified library kid. I was at the library every Saturday with my mom, and I would take out 10 books on my card and 9 books on her card. And she got to take out 1 on her card. And now I'm a library adult. I have 2 kids, and we go every Saturday, and they take out, I don't let them have all 9 of my books, but I let them have a lot. And so it's great to be here with librarians. They're my people. I feel most at home in a library. I am the author of The Hidden City, which, as Allie said, is the newest Charles Lennox mystery. It's set in Victorian London, and I like to think of them as a blend of all the writers who really influenced me, which would be Sherlock Holmes' author, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, George Eliot, P.G. Wodehouse, Elizabeth Gaskell. I could go on and on. As Allie mentioned, this is a cold case, and yeah, I hope it takes you into society a little bit and into the slums and into all the various parts of Victorian London. And that'll be out, I guess, gosh, in just a little under 2 weeks, November 4th. Yeah, so I hope you'll all give it a shot.
Awesome. Lennox is he's a fascinating detective. I really enjoyed getting to know him and his wife too. She's awesome. Van? Can you tell us about Godfall and your past work too?
Yeah, so I have had a kind of long career as a comic book writer, independent graphic novels, stuff that I've created. I've worked for a lot of the big publishers. I've written characters like James Bond, Godzilla, a whole bunch for DC Comics. And then I just had this vision of a giant alien falling out of the sky next to a small Nebraska town, like you do. Um, and so I grew up in Nebraska in a tiny town, and it was such an evocative image. So I decided to write about it. And in the story Godfall, this alien is as far as anyone can tell, it's just dead. So you have this 3 mile long, mountain-sized corpse sort of next to a small town. And the town is transformed. You have the government showing up, you have soldiers, spies, bureaucrats, just tourists, cults, everything flooding this town. And the story is really about the sheriff of this town who grew up there. He just wanted to have this very ordinary life, and then all of this falls onto his lap. So it's kind of a sci-fi book that's really a murder mystery that's really about urban and rural people being forced to coexist. But yeah, it's out January 13th from Grand Central.
It is definitely a tricky one to try to succinctly describe in terms of a genre. It doesn't
For sure.
cleanly fit anywhere. Let's see. And Josi.
Yes, hi. So my new book, Someone is After LuLu Dupree. It's the first in a new mystery series. It's my 34th published novel. I've been able to do a variety of genres, and I'm back to cozy mystery. So it's cozy mystery stuff happens off camera. And this one, LuLu, 5 years ago, was in an accident that resulted in a traumatic brain injury, which changed everything about her life, and she wasn't able to return to the life that she had in Seattle, and has instead built a new, very simple, manageable life in Sedona, Arizona. She believes in everything, the vortexes, the rocks, Christianity, Buddhism, whatever. She's got lots of beliefs, and she's always seeking kind of good energy. Someone is coming after her, however, and she is trying to figure out why and who. And so the story is her working on solving her own, or finding her own attempted murderer, and reconnecting at places with the person she was before the accident happened, and trying to kind of make sense of where she is. Has a traumatic brain injury, so she's kind of a neurodivergent, unreliable narrator to an extent. But it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun to do something new. I had a 12-book cozy series about a decade ago, and I've been doing historical romance in between that. And so it's fun to be back to a contemporary genre. She's been a lot of fun.
She is a lot of fun. She's a surprising person, that's for sure. I was never sure what was going to come out of her mouth next. We're actually going to stick with you, Josie, for the next question. So my first round of questions for y'all are all about the settings and the premises of the books. We have contemporary, historical, realistic, and some maybe not quite so realistic. So LuLu's entire story takes place over pretty much the course of one day, give or take the time it takes a poison snapple to kill her palm tree. Was that a hard timeline to squeeze a story into? And what effect do you think it has on how it feels to read the story?
Yeah, in fact, when I turned in my first version to my publisher, they came back and said, this is too fast. We need it to be spread out over a few more days. And when I went back, I just couldn't quite see it. This is her life that's at stake. Her daughter, who she does not have primary custody of, is coming in a few days. She feels a lot of urgency. She's got to figure this out. She needs to know that it's safe for her daughter to come. She's trying to figure out, bits and pieces of memory that she has. And so I, as the writer, just could not see it happening in a longer period of time, because that creates additional risks for her daughter, who is, her priority here. So it does move very quickly. The pacing of a cozy mystery needs to be a little bit quick. I'm not dealing with a hard-boiled detective. I don't have a lot, you know, she's what you would call an anti-hero amateur sleuth. Like this isn't, she doesn't want to do this, and she's not skilled in solving a crime, but she needs to get to the end of this. She needs to resolve it. So she's going to do everything she can to try and find the answers. And it's messy and it's sloppy, and she, you know, is asking for help from people who may or may not be helpful. But I felt like it fit the story that she was telling, and that she's living in. And so it was a little bit of a challenge. And I had to, you know, with my publisher's feedback, I had to step back and look at it and say, okay, how do I fix this so that it doesn't, obviously it's feeling too fast. And so I found some ways to slow it down a little bit and have her pace it a little bit differently, but it still ended up being about, yeah, it's about what, 30 hours or so. There is the lead up that we skip of the other things that have happened in the few days prior to the actual mystery. But I didn't want to, you know, I went back and tried to start it a little bit earlier, but it just didn't work. Like it needed to happen when action was happening around her and pushing her forward.
Her specific sort of neurodivergence. Also, I got the impression that like she's not the type to slow down and take this sort of measured approach to what's happening. She's
Yeah.
panicking. And so she's going from thing to thing to thing to thing because like, you know, she's panicking. And so
Yeah.
I felt like it really
She doesn't know what else to do. So she
right.
just
And
does
it's
what,
not like she can think about anything else.
right.
Somebody's trying to kill her. So
Right. And she says about herself, she's, you know, she's not a strategic person. She doesn't have
yes.
the capacity to kind of think things out and, well, if I do this, what will happen? She's acting on a lot of instinct, and she's moving quickly because
Yes.
in her mind, she doesn't want to miss anything by ignoring anything. So she acts on all of
I
it.
really felt like spreading the timeline out would have taken away from her.
That's
Like
what
it
I
made
felt
her
like too.
character stronger that it all
Well,
happened
thank you.
so
Thank
quickly
you.
together. In the vein of hard-boiled detectives, we're going to go to Charles next. So this mystery for Lennox takes place in 1879, but his very first mystery, A Beautiful Blue Death, was set in 1865. So we're like 14 years in the future. I'm really curious how you write about that time period in a way that feels authentic, and what are your favorite resources for research? Like, do you read stories set 150 years ago, or do you have other places where you kind of get yourself in that mindset?
It's a great question. I think, you know, I mean, I think with historical fiction, there are two kinds of writers, really. There's some who the history and the facts of it are completely primary, and I love and respect a lot of those writers. I read them. That's not necessarily me. Like the facts and everything are really important. But to me, tone is the most important thing. So I tend to go back and read a ton of fiction from the period. And then I do the research sort of ad hoc as I need it. And I mean, in terms of resources, my favorite is to read newspapers from the time. If I'm ever stuck, you can go and there's just this fascinating trove of resources online of old newspapers that sort of describe the texture of life back then. But for me, it really starts with reading Dickens or reading Middlemarch again for the ninth time, or, you know, like whatever it might be, reading Sherlock Holmes again, reading Wilkie Collins. So yeah, that's where it begins and ends for me. But there's a huge amount of research that goes into it that's also kind of a pleasure. So
You're kind of like immersing yourself in the language of the time period.
yeah, I would rather get a fact wrong, and I do get facts wrong. I mean, I once actually got a letter from a librarian that was like a 10-page thing of all the mistakes in my 15 books. And I was going to write back, and
Sounds
then
right.
and then the next day I got a follow-up email that was said, "Have you seen to this yet?" I was like, "No, not yet."
I'm
You
gonna
need to
put
give me a
that one.
minute.
I'm gonna put that one in my responses box. Have you seen to this yet?
Yeah.
That's
I
a
was
good
like,
one.
no, not quite yet. But so I do make, you know, there's every book there's 2 or 3 mistakes, and I get a lot of readers writing in and being like, this was a mistake. But I would much rather make that kind of mistake than to make a mistake of tone, where I feel like someone wouldn't have spoken in that voice. Or to me, the tone is what really draws me into it.
Absolutely. It really sets the whole mystery. You know,
Thank you
the
so
tone really
much.
sets the feel for the whole thing. I loved it.
Thank you.
And on a different side than being immersed in tone, CJ, I have read some about your home in Wyoming and how your love of the landscape there is sort of part of what inspired you to write Joe Pickett's story to begin with. So can you tell us what you love most about Wyoming and why you found it so inspiring?
Sure. Like Charles, I kind of grew up in a library as well. I used to ride my bike to the Casper, Wyoming library, and the librarians there would recommend books and more challenging books. And I used to, Wyoming is a huge state, but it only has 600,000 people. And it's when I say huge, I mean we've got a lot of places where people like to go, like Yellowstone Park and Jackson Hole and that kind of thing. A lot of tourism, but the population is actually very spread out. And I used to try to, when I'd go to the library, would read books about Wyoming or set there, and they were always seemed to be, although some were very beautifully written, I always felt like they were written from an outsider's point of view, someone who vacationed here or had gone through or thought of Wyoming as kind of a Western movie where everybody talked in a Southern accent and said down the road a piece. And I always thought it was not portrayed accurately. And I thought whenever I knew I would write at some point, and I thought whatever I wrote, I wanted to render the place more authentically than I had read about. And that's what I've always attempted to do. It's an interesting state in that it's probably the last state where there's only 1 degree of separation among all the people who live here. If you don't know somebody in that town, you know somebody who knows that person in that town. It's still like that. So everybody is connected in kind of weird ways. And I think that that contributes to some of the intrigue in the books, is that everybody is connected in a way. They can't get away from other people in a way. They can fight with each other at night in a public meeting, but then they're sitting there with at breakfast with them the next morning. So that kind of adds a layer of suspense that I try to portray, but also the landscape itself is a huge part of each book, because Joe Pickett, at least, is like I said, a game warden, which means he's out in the field every day in his pickup with his dog, and he encounters all sorts of things, and has cases in mountains and deserts and different parts of the state and Yellowstone Park and very remote, very local places. And I love to explore all those areas with the hope that people who read them will know the area in a different way than a traditional Western movie like they might have expected.
I think as somebody who lives in a very rural area and loves it, the feeling that you have for this landscape really comes through. And as an Arkansan, most stories about here that are written by people who are not from here tend to kind of two-dimensionalize the people and the situations and the complexity of life in a rural area. And I found it so refreshing to read a book with rural characters written about by somebody who really grasps that rural mindset.
Right. Thank you. And that is one of those things. Most of the people who live here choose to live here because they like it, but they're also fairly well educated and have a lot of very diverse and interesting backgrounds. And I want to portray that in the books, that everybody is not a one-dimensional character who just rode in from the plains and got off his horse.
Yes. And Van, your book, Godfall, really highlights this sort of juxtaposition of rural and the old school rural mindset and this fresh urban thing that's happening. So in a piece for Georgia Public Broadcasting's Narrative Edge show, Peter Biello likens Godfall to Kafka's Metamorphosis, and that it asks the reader to accept some pretty strange truths. Like, from the very beginning, you woke up as a giant cockroach, a 3-foot giant fell out of the sky. I mean, a 3-mile giant fell out of the sky into your town. How does this fantastic premise set the stage for the characters and what they're about to go through in this rural urban mashup?
Yeah. I mean, at the start, I'll just say, something that's really important to me as a writer is it's the kind of thing that Carl Jung writes about, like the mass unconscious, and that there are these images that every once in a while sort of appear to you, like they rise up as an artist and they show themselves to you. And I think as a young writer, I would like every once in a while, if I had some, some pop of inspiration and be like, oh, like, can I fit that in as a grace note in something? And what I've really embraced as a writer is if an image that feels iconic, that feels emotional, that feels interesting, if it manifests, I'm just like, okay, that's the thing. So yeah, I really just, I had this, like I said, this vision of this alien falling and landing. And what hit me right at the start was Western Nebraska is flat. It's just as flat as you can possibly get. And so then to have that horizon, and I love that horizon as a kid, you could see everything. It's like every sunset is the greatest sunset you've ever seen because there's nothing to block it. But to have all of a sudden this form of something, this, biological something that's blocking it, it was just so powerful. So I was like, okay, I have to explore what that is. And from there, I mean, I just kind of, I always go back to this thing that, so the phrase suspension of disbelief was not invented as an idea of like the audience has to suspend their disbelief, right? Like you as a reader, as a viewer, like that you have to shut off part of your critical brain. The phrase was invented by Coleridge, and he was basically writing at a time where people were writing very straight, boring slice of life stuff. And he said, man, I want to write about ghosts and, like crazy, fantastical stuff. And so he said that if you create real emotion, audiences will suspend their disbelief. So it's actually on the writer to craft real emotion. So that was my goal, was I have this insane thing that's utterly, unbelievable. But if I really focus in on the characters and make the whole story about these characters, about the sheriff, about the world of people around them, I think people are going to buy it and get past this giant absurd thing.
Absolutely. And I felt like it was such an interesting juxtaposition of like, okay, I have accepted that a 3-mile giant fell out of the sky that we know nothing about. And then the story takes off and it's very human. It's very much about the people and how they're handling what has happened. Not that the giant doesn't end up playing a role, but that is not where the story really begins. The story begins with the people and how this has affected them. It's a fascinating premise to me.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think it's relatable in part because we all have had crazy, massive things drop in the middle of our lives.
It almost felt familiar, like, oh yeah, sure, this crazy thing is happening, and I still have to come to work and man the front desk and do the normal things while like
Right.
the 3-mile giant just fell.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like that to live at all in 2025, I think. So it felt very like of the time for sure. Okay,
Thanks.
so Ross Montgomery, author of Murder at World's End, couldn't be with us today, but his book is about this really strange but extremely factual historical event called the Comet Panic of 1910, during which people became convinced that the passing of Halley's Comet was going to bring poisonous gases that would kill everyone. So we have a short video from Ross introducing us to Tithe Hall and its extraordinarily entertaining cast of personalities, as well as its historical context. Rebecca, did you have that video? Oh, tech difficulties. Okay, we'll move on and we will stick that video in somewhere else when we get it figured out. Okay. Our next round of questions is about details in the stories. So 2 of our stories have canine companions, and I love dogs in books. So CJ, we're going to start with you. Biscuit the lab is extremely endearing, and he is such a lab. I loved his personality so much. Can you talk about what role Biscuit plays in Joe's life for him? And then is he based on any real life dogs that you can tell us about?
Sure. Biscuit is actually in the series the 3rd Labrador in Joe's life over the length of the series. And We're dog lovers too. We have a bunch of dogs, labs and corgis, and I tend to incorporate them in the novels, the real dogs. And so every one of the Joe's Labradors has been my Labrador in real life. Same name, same color, same personality. I don't do that a lot. I used to do it with horses in the book. I would name them after my wife's horses, but then they would almost always die in the books, and my wife got annoyed with that, so I stopped doing that. But I still do the dogs. And the thing is that it's very true to form, because game wardens in Wyoming, there's only 50 of them in the entire state, and they tend to be out every day in their green Ford Game and Fish pickups, and almost all of them have their dogs along with them during the day. It's rare will you see a game warden that doesn't have a dog in the front seat or the back seat. So that's very true to form, and probably the only profession where you can always take your dog to work. So Joe spends a lot of time, probably more time with his Labrador than he does with any member of his family. And I enjoy that. It's fun, but it's also true to life.
I love it. I love it. He's a funny character for sure. Charles, in the Hidden City, there's a basset hound named Freddie who is enlisted to help Lennox track someone down. And he does this by following the scent of anise. I should have looked up the pronunciation. But I didn't know that dogs had such a reaction to that scent. Can you tell us where you discovered that fact and whether Freddie has a recurring role in Lennox's adventure? Like, can we expect to read about him in other books too? And is he real also, of course?
Yeah, that was such a fun part of the book to write. He's a basset hound, and my friend, who's actually a mystery novelist, Steph Cha, she wrote Your House Will Pay, and she has a series out called Butterfly. She has 2 basset hounds, and I was talking with her about them, and she told me what great tracking dogs they are. And actually, as I was writing this book, we lost our dog of 17 years, and it was unlike any heartbreak I've ever known. I mean, and I've lost people, but there's something about losing your dog that is overwhelming. And so I think that infiltrates your mind as you're writing a book. And in this case, so I wanted a dog character, and I wanted the sweetness of that relationship. And as you say, dogs are obsessed with Anise. Like, even otherwise sane dogs will lose their minds, which is a fact I learned from a great book called Danny the Champion of the World by Roald Dahl, where he talks about how pheasants will lose their minds for raisins the way that dogs will lose their minds for anise. And so basically, the detective Charles Lennox plants some anise on someone he suspects, and then they track him through London. And so, yeah, I'm going to bring that dog back for sure.
Awesome. He was also a really interesting character. Something about basset hounds that just evoke this funny mental image. They're just funny dogs.
The ears dragging on the ground.
All right, Josi. Your story does not feature a dog, but it does feature a lot of flamingos. My personal favorite was the flamingo with the reflective sunglasses stepping out of the DeLorean, because DeLoreans are my favorite cars, and I had such a crystal clear mental image of this. What do flamingos have to do with LuLu Dupree, and why flamingos?
So it's a visualization technique that she uses to keep her thoughts from spinning down thought roads that might increase her anxiety. So it's something that she has learned during her recovery to help kind of bring her back to the present. And it is a real thing. It is a real part of the neuroplasticity theory, which is based on the fact that we have kind of our own deer trails, if you will, of thoughts, looping thoughts that all of us get stuck in from time to time. And it gets very difficult to not think about a certain person or a certain thing. So she's learned this technique. The reason it's flamingos is like all of us, I'm a real person and have my own real hard things. And I had a particular thing that would continue to come back to mind. And one day, I don't even know where I saw it, but I read somewhere that scientists didn't really know exactly why flamingos stand on one foot. And for some reason, it caught my attention. I found myself on Wikipedia reading up on flamingos and trying to see, is that real? Do people really not know why they do that. Turns out they do know why they do that, but it was interesting that it captured my attention so much. For me, flamingos don't have any relevance in my life. You know, I live in Utah, in a landlocked state. I've seen real flamingos maybe twice in my whole life. Um, and it's not my favorite animal or anything. I didn't know anything before I decided to, you know, do my little deep dive. But I would start repeating when my thoughts would start running down that trail that would, for me, create anxiety. I would start repeating what I'd read about the flamingos. You know, there's 6 species of flamingos. There's the Taylor and the American. And for whatever reason, that worked for me personally. So when I was creating LuLu, I thought, well, I'm just going to put that in. Now, hers is different. She is envisioning like a cartoon version of a flamingo in some kind of funny costume or funny situation, or like you said, the DeLorean scene from Back to the Future. For me, it was just trying to recall the information that I'd learned about him, but it worked. Like, it worked really well for me. And so I have it work for her. And it's something that ended up being a lot more fun than I expected when I first put it into the story. But it is based on actual neuroplasticity theory. And I recommend everyone find something that's kind of neutral in your world that doesn't have relevance, and, you know, use that to get your thoughts out of those patterns. And in the process, you're building new patterns. You're consciously taking control of your thoughts rather than your thoughts just dragging you down these familiar lanes that doesn't do most of us any good to continue down. It's usually past experiences or fear of what might be coming next. And the only thing that exists is the present. So the visualization technique helps do that for LuLu and can help everybody.
I thought that the choice of flamingos in particular was really interesting because like culturally and socially, we use them as like an emblem of silliness.
Yeah,
They're difficult to take seriously.
they are.
Looking pink birds on one foot. And so it really, that seemed to make it even more effective at derailing these scary trains of thought she would find herself on, is like, oh, this silly light image.
Right. There's no threat, right?
Yeah,
Like it's not a threatening image.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love
Yeah,
them.
glad you loved it.
I did. They were funny. Van, instead of an animal in your story, I'm going to ask about the people in animal masks. So there's a cult that's popped up since the giant fell, and they call themselves the Tonys, and they all wear tiger masks. Can you tell us a little more about them and why David, the main character, the sheriff, is so disturbed by them, even though, like, generally he's a very, like, he just kind of takes it as it comes to some extent. He's not real worked up about some things, but this cult, like, really bothers him.
Yeah, so they don't call themselves the Tonys. It's the derisive name.
Everybody else calls them
for out. Yeah. So again, it's like sometimes I write stuff where I'm really like mapping stuff out and really, you know, want everything to be super rational and follow a pattern. And sometimes it's like an idea just pops in. It's like, okay, that's a thing. So I think the genesis is that my actual hometown, so the town in the book is called Little Springs, which has all of 700 people before landfall. My actual hometown, Llewellyn, Nebraska, had 300 people. The high school sports teams, we were the Tigers before the high school closed after my freshman year, when there were all of 3 of us in the freshman class. So I think the Tigers, it was just kind of this thing in my head. And I had been just reading different stories and different fiction about giants, and then there's a lot of from William Blake. There's a lot of like giant iconography and imagery and sort of these huge epic things, and I always thought there should be a doomsday cult, or, you know, someone that was predicting like the arrival of some god, right? And then they're proven right. And sort of the more absurd that they could be, the better. So I decided they should be these adherents of William Blake's writings, Tiger, of course. But for the main character, you know, there's like the original town is still pretty preserved, and he is that's kind of like his domain, and like he'll deal with the rest, but it's like you don't touch the actual blueprint of the original town. But the people that were in the cold, they bought this empty building in the middle of the town. So it's like the weirdest possible thing that's right in the heart of the old town. And to him, that's just like the worst thing possible. And so he's trying to do everything he can to get rid of them. But they actually, like, they don't hurt anyone. They don't do, they aren't doing anything bad at all. They're just really, really weird.
I kind of wonder if for him they are emblematic of this change that's happening, and he can't control a whole lot of the change, but this piece is just like, this is a step too far into my front yard.
Yeah, well, you can't get a shovel and move a 3-mile tall alien.
Right.
It's not like a dead armadillo on the side of the road.
Maybe
so
you can this from happening.
Yeah, so he can't deal with that. So this is, it's like, okay. And I think that's again, it's like when people have real traumas or real huge things, it's like during the pandemic, you would see like people can't affect all of this, but then like some tiny opportunity comes before them and they lose their minds trying to, deal with some tiny little thing. So yeah, absolutely.
Like overcompensating for that loss of control. I think we have a plan B worked out for Ross's video, so we're going to watch that now. Oh. Yay.
Hello, Library Journal. My name is Ross Montgomery. Thank you so much for having me along to your day of dialogue. I'm just sorry that I can't be there in person. I was about to say there in person. It's virtual, isn't it? It's still not in person. But it is more in person than sending a video. So thank you very much for letting me send this in so I can talk to you about my newest book, which I'm very excited to talk about. Now, I've been an author for the last 15 years, but I've been working as a children's author. And if any of you had heard of any of my children's book, it's probably most likely to be my most recent children's book in the States, which was this one, I Am Rebel. This was the Barnes and Noble Children's Book of the Month a few months ago. But the book that I'm talking to you about today is not a children's book. This is my very first book for adults and my very first murder mystery. It is called The Murder at World's End. Now, this is the British front cover. It comes out in Britain at the end of October. It's going to be out in the States on, I believe, the 6th of January, with a similar cover, but the colour scheme is different. There's some like cool extra details. Hopefully there'll be an opportunity to sort of show the front cover and all the info that's going to come up as well. The book is set in 1910 during a real-life thing that happened called the Halley's Comet Panic. What it was that people believed when Halley's Comet went past the Earth, it was going to destroy all life as we knew it. And there were lots of different thoughts and theories about how it was going to do that. Some people thought that it was going to crash headlong into the Earth. Some people thought it was going to flood the atmosphere with poisonous gases. Other people thought it was going to wither crops. Some people thought it was going to set off electrical storms that would blind everyone who see them. People thought it would make the oceans switch around. And of course, lots of people did not believe that this was going to happen, right? Lots of people were just excited that there was a comet passing the Earth. But loads of people were drawn into a complete panic around this. There were stampedes worldwide. There were riots. People took out comet insurance. They built shelters. They'd sold anti-comet umbrellas. I'm not even joking. Somebody even came up with the genius idea of making anti-comet pills, which I always thought was quite cool. But that was it. Half the world were excited, the other half of the world were losing their minds. And in the book, one such person who loses their mind is the Viscount of World's End, a remote tidal island just off the coast of Cornwall in the United Kingdom. And he believes that the best way to survive the poisonous gases that he thinks are going to flood Earth's atmosphere are to completely seal up his mansion from the outside world. Lock every door, lock every window, block every chimney, seal up every single doorway, including the keyhole. People were told at the time to seal their keyholes with candle wax, which I think is a really nice historic detail. His plan is that he's going to get every single member of the household, servants and guests, shut away in their own individual rooms, seal them up, and then the next day it means that they will be able to have survived the apocalypse. However, come the morning, the only person dead is him, the Viscount, found murdered with his family crossbow inside a locked and sealed study which no one entered or left. It's a locked room murder mystery. No one's ever done that before. That's where we meet the detective duo, the unlikely sleuthing pair at the centre of this story, Stockingham and Pike. He is an ex-con under-butler, just out of prison on his last chance. She is the Viscount's elderly aunt, who's an octogenarian secret genius with a foul mouth, who's locked away in the corner of the mansion for her safety and ours. And together, those two have to find a way of working together to try and catch the killer before they kill again. Will they be able to do that and work out who murdered the Viscount? The answer is yes. Yes, they do that. It's a murder mystery. You find out who did it at the end. I mean, imagine if you didn't, right? Just be a really bleak, depressing book. As you can probably tell, when I wrote this, I was really excited about those odd, unusual, lesser-known bits of historic detail. That's always been complete catnip to me. I'm obsessed with them. But I also really wanted to write a tightly plotted, intricate, ingenious, well-constructed murder mystery that was also full of jokes. I started thinking about this book during lockdown when I got completely hooked once again on murder mystery TV series. Things like Midsummer Murders that I know have found their way over the States. They're cozy, they're fun, they're silly, they're intricately plotted, but they've got loads of good jokes in there as well. They are the perfect form of escapism as far as I'm concerned. I hope I've given you a bit of an understanding of The Murder at World's End and why I wrote it, and I hope that lots of you are listening and going, oh, that sounds quite interesting, I think I might get a copy. And that is out on the 6th of January. Thank you so much for letting me talk about it. Have a lovely rest of your day of Dialog.
So they had me at Knives Out meets Downton Abbey, and then he threw in Midsummer Murders. And if the tone of the book is anything like the tone of the video, I am quite certain it will be amazing. Just correct me up. All right, we have a little less than 15 minutes left, so we're going to do one more round, and we're going to try and keep our answers kind of brief, and that way we have time for a few audience questions. And in the meantime, participants, if you have any questions for our authors, go ahead and put them in the chat. And we'll filter through those here in just a minute when we get done with this round of questions. And for this round, I'd like to dig a little deeper into some of the characters in your stories. One thing all of the stories had in common was really strong, complex, multi-dimensional characters, and they're all really fun to read about. So we are going to start with Van. You were a crime reporter in Arkansas, my home state. There's no shortage of material for crime reporting in Arkansas. I know people talk a lot about the Florida Man headlines, but we have our fair share of wild stories over here too. So in Godfall, Charlotte returns to town as a reporter, but she's a TV news producer rather than like a newspaper crime reporter. And I'm wondering if your work as a reporter influenced her character, and also how that work might have otherwise influenced the events of the story.
Yeah, I mean, part of it was just with Charlotte. This is someone who grew up in Little Springs and like the old version of it, and then now is returning to it. And I think, I mean, earlier you had talked about your experience of living in a small town and moving away and coming back. I think that's a very universal thing. I mean, when I go back home, it's a very different place, and I'm a very different person. But you know, there's a weird thing when you're a reporter where your best day is someone else's worst day. And what that means is you know, like something awful happens, like there's a murder, or particularly grisly murder or whatever, like you end up on the front page with your story. And so you can find that starts to like twist your mindset a little bit, where you almost are like hoping for horrible things to happen, or like get excited about horrible things to happen. And so that's kind of what she's grappling with, is this mix of like wanting to do the right thing and tell stories the right way and tell the truth, but then also having this strange motivation to also like, you know, have bad stuff happen.
I love it. CJ, Joe's 3 daughters, Sheridan, April, and Lucy. They're all really well-rounded characters, but they are so different from one another. Can you introduce our audience to each of them briefly and talk about like kind of how they're similar and how they're different, and how that helps them find out what happened to their dad?
Sure. The Crossroads has kind of a weird construction, and it's all based on concept of threes. There are 3 ranches whose owners are all suspects in the shooting of Joe Pickett. There are 3 roads from a Crossroads area that lead to those 3 ranches. And there are 3 daughters, Joe Pickett's daughters, who show up to try to figure out which of those ranch owners was responsible. As I mentioned earlier, the girls have grown up in the series from the very first book, where Sheridan, the oldest, was only 7 years old, and Lucy, the youngest, was only 5. So over the years, they've grown, they've matured. The middle daughter, April, was actually adopted by the Pickett family throughout the series. She's very different. But yes, the oldest daughter, Sheridan, is a falconer. She works for a falconry abatement company. She's very tough. She's independent. She's a business owner. And because she's the oldest, she figures that she's got to lead the investigation, whether her sisters agree with her or not. The middle daughter, April, the adopted daughter, works for a private detective in Montana. She's a little bit out there. She shaves her head. She turns her hair color. She has a nose ring, Allie, actually, when she shows up.
Shocking.
And she's probably the toughest of them, the quickest to think, where's my gun? When they start the investigation. And then the third daughter, the youngest, is Lucy, who has just graduated from college. She's by far the most empathetic of the 3 girls, mainly because she's watched her 2 sisters screw up over the years and has just kind of hung back and observed. But she's also a much closer student of human emotions and can intuit things with people that maybe her sisters can't, because she spent so much time observing. So with the 3 ranch families and the differences between them, the girls divide up to decide which girl should approach which ranch family, knowing what their strengths and weaknesses are. So like I said, this is a different one because it's all told from the point of view of the sisters and their investigations, and how each of them investigates differently with the suspects.
It's a neat little braided effect that you have each of the sisters, and they're each kind of solving their own mini mystery inside of this bigger story. It was really fascinating way to put it together. I liked it a lot. And
Thank you.
as an eldest daughter, absolutely do not recognize the impulse to take over and be in charge. Okay. Charles, Lennox's beloved wife, Lady Jane, has taken up with this growing movement toward women's suffrage in England. But this is kind of complicated for him in some interesting ways. Can you give us a little bit of background on the suffrage movement at this point in England's history and why it would put him in a difficult position to be supportive of her views?
Yeah, absolutely. The Hidden City is set in 1879, and women's suffrage wouldn't pass for another 35, 40 years. But at the time, it seemed imminent to a lot of the people fighting for it. I mean, Seneca Falls, which was the huge convention about women's rights, was in 1848. It was already 30 years old. And so the vanguard in England was always led by aristocratic women. And it's always been really important to me that Lady Jane, who's Lennox's wife, be his equal, in some ways his superior, which I think a lot of us in marriages can recognize. And I wanted her in this book to have her own life, her own world. And, I was reading, you asked about research earlier, I was reading about the case of the first 2 women who were ever medical students in Great Britain. And they were met with a huge protest in Dublin. People were throwing fruit and vegetables at them and calling them names. And then they were hauled into court and forced to pay the costs of the protest. And the injustice of that and the bravery of these women from the upper class who couldn't even get divorced. They couldn't have their own bank account, obviously. Like, I really fell in love with that as a story. And so I wanted Lady Jane to explore that. And Lennox, I mean, I think he believes in the cause, but is worried about the social cost to someone he loves. And so her courage against his caution is sort of the balance I was trying to strike.
Fabulous. All right, Josi. LuLu has a teenage daughter for whom she does not have full or even half-time custody. And while this is not entirely unusual in real life, I know many real-life examples of this, it is fairly unusual, to my knowledge, in a story for a mother to be both non-custodial and the protagonist. Usually if you have a non-custodial mother in a story, she's not the good guy. I thought this was such an interesting piece of overlooked representation. And I just wondered if you could talk about Sophie and why you structured this part of the story this way.
Well, based on LuLu's history, she had a traumatic brain injury. She was in rehab for quite a while. It's reasonable that her ex-husband would have taken custody. And when I was first creating the story, I was going to have her be the custodial parent and have this 13-year-old daughter that she was doing her best with. But as LuLu developed as a character, it just did not feel like a reasonable option. And her ex-husband did take custody and he had to be the primary caretaker for a year. Would he truly just relinquish that, especially where LuLu was not able to live in the Northwest anymore? And so I kind of explored that, and I had kind of the same thought. I'm like, well, will readers be able to trust her or relate to her, or will our own judgments get in the way of that? And I decided to go with it and let readers kind of decide. But I hope all of us, in the way that we write our characters and show lives, the best thing a book can do is make our real lives better. And I would love for people to take a little bit added measure of grace for the circumstances that we see and that we so easily judge, and make decisions about, like we think we understand how and why things are the way that they are. If I asked everyone to raise their hand if your life has turned out exactly the way you expected it would, there aren't going to be any hands in the air. And so she is a complex character and she has a complex life. And at a certain point, she had to make a decision of staying in the Northwest, where she had health issues and headaches that made her a fairly non-functional person, or go to a place where she could be the very best version of herself, but separate her from her daughter. She's not at peace with that decision, but she works hard to make the right best choices that she can in her life, and then try and show up as best she can for her daughter. And I think most of us, all of us, are doing the very best that we can within our circumstances. And then wouldn't it be cool if we felt like people around us were seeing us that way, and knowing that we're all trying to do our very best? So that's kind of where that came from.
That is absolutely what comes across
Good,
from
thank
her
you.
character in terms of her relationship with her daughter. It is not particularly fraught. There are not hard feelings between them. It's just the way that things are. And I think that that's woefully underportrayed in literature in general. Okay, we have 2 minutes. So we are going to do a lightning round real quick. So I want you guys to fill us in on what comes next in your long running series, or what's happening from here for you. So Charles, we're going to start with you. Now that Lennox is mended from his American trip and he's healed from being stabbed, he says he has not felt better since he was 30. Does this mean we can look forward to many more adventures from him? Do you have more stories planned?
Yes, at least one. I mean, so next week, going on tour, the Hidden City, and come see me, come find my tour dates. I'm going on road for 2 weeks, and I just finished the next book, which will be called Midnight in the House of Commons.
Fabulous. All right, Van, Godfall has been optioned for TV with none other than Ron Howard to direct. How much are you going to be involved with that process? And can you give us anything about the timeline? And does David's story continue?
Yeah, I'm an executive producer on the show. It's moving along, which in Hollywood terms mean God only knows.
At least something's happening, right?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like things are going. And I just turned in the sequel. So there will be 3 books in the series. And then I'm trying to think, I'm also writing another TV show that's a separate adaptation of one of my graphic novels. So, all good and busy here.
Awesome. Josi, what's next for LuLu?
I am also working on book 2. So per my current contract, there will be 3 books in this series. We'll see if maybe it will extend past that. But I'm working on the final legs of book 2, and I don't know how the other writers on this panel are, but whatever book I'm writing right now is the worst thing I've ever written. So it's the worst book I've ever written. If anybody wants to send some some prayers and good vibes my way, that would be awesome. It's due November 1st, and I'm still missing a couple of pretty key plot points. I'm a pretty messy writer. I'm not very good at outlining. I kind of go with things and then realize I just spent 20,000 words going the wrong direction. So, but I'm working on that, and we'll get that. I will get it turned in. I'm wonderful with deadlines. The stress they create for whatever reason works for me, which is masochistic, but it will be out September of next year.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely understand that about the pressure. CJ, what is next for Joe Pickett? Do you have the next one written?
I do not have the next one written, but I'm ready to begin it. This is part of my process, as I do a lot of research on different subjects and then pitch those to my editor. I have not yet pitched this book to my editor, so therefore I'm not going to tell you what it's about because it might get shot down. Probably won't be, but yeah, that'll be another year away.
We will all be looking forward to it. And
Thank you.
Crossroads comes out in February of next year, right?
Right.
Awesome. All right. I am so grateful to all of you brilliant authors for joining us today, and to Ross Montgomery for sending in that hilarious video, and to all of our participants for being here and listening to our discussion. Next up is a short break. So if you haven't already, make sure to visit the exhibit hall to chat with reps and grab free resources. Thanks for coming to Library Journal's Day of Dialogue, and happy reading.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Allie.